This isn't just a story. It's a journey, one that'll stay with you long after the video ends. So if you've ever felt love, loss, betrayal, or hope, then stay with us. Because this story deserves to be heard from the very first second to the very last. If this video moves you, even for a moment, please give it a like. Leave a comment telling us which part hit you the hardest, and share it with someone who needs to feel something real today. And if you love stories that are raw, emotional, and unforgettable, then subscribe to the channel. Because we don't just tell stories here, we bring them to life. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom fell silent. Eleanor Carter sat in her wheelchair, watching as her husband, Richard, wrapped his arm around his pregnant mistress in front of 200 stunned guests. "I'd like to introduce you all to Samantha," Richard announced proudly, "not just as our company's new creative director, but as the mother of my child, and the future I've always dreamed of." Cameras flashed as Richard looked directly at Eleanor, his disabled wife of 12 years, with something between pity and disdain. "Sometimes life gives us a second chance at happiness," he continued, raising his champagne glass. But as tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes, something unexpected happened. She smiled, and that smile sent a chill down Richard's spine. 3 years earlier, Eleanor and Richard Carter were the golden couple of the architectural world. Their modern glass home overlooking the city perfectly reflected their success. He was the charismatic businessman who made deals happen. She was the brilliant architect whose designs won awards and changed skylines. They complemented each other perfectly, recalled Sandra, Eleanor's former colleague. Richard knew how to sell Eleanor's vision, and Eleanor knew how to make Richard's promises reality. But everything changed on a rainy Tuesday in November. The accident at the Riverside development should have been impossible. Safety protocols were Eleanor's obsession. Yet somehow, a temporary platform collapsed while she was inspecting the 14th floor of their newest project. The fall shattered her spine, explained Dr. Patel, the neurologist who treated Eleanor. "We initially weren't sure if she would walk again. After 3 surgeries and months of painful rehabilitation, Eleanor could manage short distances with walking aids, but remained dependent on a wheelchair for daily life. Her once busy schedule of site visits and design meetings shrank to physical therapy appointments and doctor visits. And Richard, the man who had vowed to stand by her side in sickness and in health, began a subtle but unmistakable withdrawal. To the outside world, Richard Carter remained the devoted husband. He hired the best specialists, renovated their home for accessibility, and spoke movingly at charity galas about their journey. "My wife has shown incredible courage," he would say, his hand resting protectively on Eleanor's shoulder. "Her resilience inspires me every day." But behind closed doors, a different reality was emerging, one of cold silences, missed dinners, and growing resentment. The Berkeley Foundation's annual fundraiser was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over San Francisco's elite. Eleanor Carter sat near the edge of the grand ballroom, her wheelchair positioned at a table partially hidden behind a large floral arrangement. From her vantage point, she could observe her husband Richard commanding the room. At 42, he remained strikingly handsome, his salt and pepper hair and tailored tuxedo giving him the distinguished air of success. He moved effortlessly between groups, each laugh and handshake cementing business relationships worth millions. "He certainly knows how to work a room," remarked an older woman who had joined Eleanor at her table. "Your husband has the mayor eating out of his hand." Eleanor smiled politely. Richard's always been good with people. What she didn't say was how she had begun measuring the distance between them. Not just the physical space across the ballroom, but the growing emotional chasm that had opened since her accident. They had met 15 years earlier at Princeton University's architecture program. Eleanor Wong, the serious student from a family of engineers. Richard Carter, the charismatic scholarship student with big dreams and even bigger ambition. He asked me to review his project. Eleanor later told her sister Melanie. It was terrible. All flash, no function. I told him his beautiful tower would collapse in the first strong wind. Instead of being offended, Richard had laughed and asked her to dinner. Teach me, he'd said. I want to learn from the best. Their romance bloomed quickly. Richard's charm balanced Eleanor's intensity. Her precision complemented his vision. By graduation, they were partners in every sense, launching Carter plus Wong Sustainable Design with nothing but student loans and determination. Their early projects were small, a restaurant renovation, an eco-friendly dental office, but their reputation grew steadily. Eleanor's innovative designs prioritized sustainability and accessibility long before they became industry buzzwords. Richard secured the clients and financing, his natural charisma opening doors that remained closed to many young architects. The watershed moment came 8 years ago, winning the commission for the Canopy, a mixed-use development that transformed an abandoned industrial site into an award-winning green community. The Canopy put us on the map, Richard often said in interviews. That's when I knew we were going to change the world. Success brought wealth, recognition, and increasingly ambitious projects. The small firm expanded, becoming Carter Development Group. The name change a subtle shift that Eleanor had initially resisted, but eventually accepted as good business. Their personal life seemed equally charmed. Weekends at their cabin in Sonoma, vacations exploring architectural wonders across Europe and Asia. Plans for children were postponed repeatedly for just one more big project, until those conversations gradually faded. At the gala, Eleanor checked her watch. It was nearly 10 p.m., and Richard had barely acknowledged her since their arrival. She watched as he chatted animatedly with Vanessa Lee, the city planning commissioner whose approval they needed for their newest development. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Martina. Don't forget your 10 p.m. medication. How's the gala? Surviving the small talk. Eleanor smiled, grateful for her physical therapist's concern. Martina was one of the few bright spots in her post-accident life, tough during their sessions, but unfailingly supportive beyond them. Watching Richard work his magic, Eleanor typed back, I'm practically invisible. Martina replied immediately, their loss. Want me to come kidnap you? I make a very convincing medical emergency. Eleanor chuckled, drawing a curious glance from her table-mate. Tomorrow's session's still at 2? She texted back. Yes, and wear comfortable clothes. We're trying something new. Eleanor was about to respond when she noticed Richard approaching with Commissioner Lee. And here's the creative genius behind our accessibility initiatives. Richard announced warmly, his hand settling on Eleanor's shoulder with practiced affection. My wife insists every Carter project must be accessible to everyone. Eleanor forced a smile. It's just good design. Buildings should work for all people. So admirable, the commissioner gushed. Richard was just telling me about your accident. Such a tragedy for someone so talented. Eleanor maintained her smile even as she registered Richard's narrative at work, casting her as the inspiring tragedy, her career spoken of in the past tense. I still consult on all our projects, Eleanor said firmly. In fact, I've been working on some modifications to the Westbrook proposal that I'd love to discuss with your office. The commissioner looked momentarily confused, glancing at Richard, who smoothly interjected. Eleanor likes to keep her hand in things when her health permits. Now, Vanessa, about that height variance. And just like that, Eleanor was sidelined from her own project. She watched as Richard guided the commissioner away, already deep in technical discussions that once would have been Eleanor's domain. Later that night, as their driver helped Eleanor into their modified SUV, Richard checked his phone, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. Derek wants to meet for breakfast before the board presentation, he said, not looking up. I'll have Agnes bring your breakfast tray in the morning. I could come to the presentation, Eleanor suggested. It is our company. Richard's smile was thin. It's just financials, terribly boring. Better you rest for your therapy session. The next morning, Eleanor sat on the terrace of their home, sipping her tea as the fog lifted from the hills. Martina arrived precisely at 9 a.m., dressed in her usual black leggings and motivational tank top. Ready to suffer? She grinned. Let's call it evolving, Eleanor replied. Their session was intense. Martina had Eleanor working on upper body strength and core stability, exercises designed to prepare her for more advanced mobility tools. You're stronger than last week, Martina noted as Eleanor managed a full extension on the resistance bands. Must be all the rage I'm suppressing. After the workout, as Martina packed up, Eleanor asked, Do you think I could drive again? Martina paused, then nodded slowly. With the right car and modifications, absolutely. You'd need hand controls, of course. But I've seen clients drive across the country. Eleanor's mind whirred. What kind of cars work for that? I can send you a few resources. But honestly, go test drive some. See what feels right. That afternoon, while Richard was at his meeting, Eleanor instructed Agnes to help her get ready. She put on a navy silk blouse and cream slacks, opting for simple pearl earrings. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and her makeup subtle but elegant. She had Agnes drive her to the Lexford Auto Gallery, a high-end dealership specializing in customized vehicles. As the car pulled up, Eleanor felt a flutter of nerves. She hadn't been to a dealership since before the accident. Inside, the space gleamed with polished chrome and minimalist decor. A young salesman approached with a practiced smile. Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I help you? I'd like to look at modified vehicles, Eleanor said, her voice calm but firm. I'm interested in test driving something with hand controls. The salesman blinked. Oh, well, I'm not sure we have anything like that available today. These are performance models, usually not modified. I'm aware, Eleanor said, wheeling closer to a sleek, black coupe. But I'd still like to look. He hesitated, then gestured toward a corner of the showroom. We might have one in the back, but they're expensive just so, you know. Eleanor smiled. So, am I? As she examined the car, another employee, older, more polished, approached. Ms. Carter. Miss Carter, I'm the manager here. I believe we may have something that fits your needs. Would you care to step into my office and discuss the options? Within an hour, Eleanor had a list of available vehicles, customization options, and a tentative appointment for a private test drive. When Richard returned home that evening, Eleanor casually mentioned her outing. You went to a dealership? He said, surprised. Without me. I wasn't aware I needed permission. Richard chuckled uneasily. Of course not. It's just that's a lot of effort for someone still doing therapy twice a week. I'm not planning a road trip. I just want my independence. Well, we can talk about it. Maybe something safe and low to the ground, not one of those big SUVs. Eleanor didn't respond. She simply sipped her tea and looked out at the darkening sky. Later that night, as Richard slept beside her, Eleanor stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the past few months. The whispers at galas. The way Vanessa Lee had looked at Richard. The increasing number of work dinners and out-of-town conferences. Something was shifting. And it wasn't just her body. It was her marriage, her identity, her place in the world she had helped build. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something stir that had nothing to do with pain or grief. Determination. The next week, Eleanor returned to Lexford Auto Gallery for her private test drive. This time, she was greeted by the manager himself, who led her to a customized SUV parked outside, midnight blue, with rose gold accents that shimmered in the sunlight. The hand controls are intuitive, he explained. Push forward to brake, pull down to accelerate. We've adjusted the seat height and added a pivot transfer base. Eleanor transferred herself into the driver's seat with practiced efficiency. Once settled, she took a deep breath and started the ignition. The engine purred to life, and something inside her did too. The drive was exhilarating. She took the vehicle around the test track, then ventured briefly onto a quiet suburban road. As she maneuvered the car through curves and traffic lights, she felt, for the first time in years, fully in control. When she returned, the manager smiled. "You handled that beautifully. I'd like to buy it," she said. "We can finalize everything today if you're ready." Eleanor paused. "Actually, I'd like it delivered." He raised an eyebrow. "Certainly. To your home?" "No. To Riverstone Academy, Friday at 1 p.m. Please make sure it's spotless." "Of course. May I ask why?" Eleanor smiled. "It's my nephew's graduation, and I plan to make an entrance." Friday arrived with clear skies and a buzzing crowd. The private school's parking lot was packed with luxury vehicles, proud parents, and giddy students in blue and silver gowns. Eleanor arrived in a taxi, having arranged for her new SUV to arrive a few minutes later. She positioned herself strategically near the entrance to the auditorium, where Richard was already chatting with school board members. He saw her and waved, but his expression flickered with surprise. He hadn't expected her to show up. "Eleanor," he greeted, walking over. "You made it." "So admirable," the commissioner gushed. "Richard was just telling me about your accident. Such a tragedy for someone so talented." Eleanor maintained her smile even as she registered Richard's narrative at work, casting her as the inspiring tragedy, her career spoken of in the past tense. "I still consult on all our projects," Eleanor said firmly. "In fact, I've been working on some modifications to the Westbrook proposal that I'd love to discuss with your office." The commissioner looked momentarily confused, glancing at Richard, who smoothly interjected. "Eleanor likes to keep her hand in things, when her health permits. Now, Vanessa, about that height variance." And just like that, Eleanor was sidelined from her own project. She watched as Richard guided the commissioner away, already deep in technical discussions that once would have been Eleanor's domain. Later that night, as their driver helped Eleanor into their modified SUV, Richard checked his phone, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. "Derek wants to meet for breakfast before the board presentation," he said, not looking up. "I'll have Agnes bring your breakfast tray in the morning." "I could come to the presentation," Eleanor suggested. "It is our company." Richard's smile was thin. "It's just financials, terribly boring. Better you rest for your therapy session." The next morning, Eleanor sat on the terrace of their home, sipping her tea as the fog lifted from the hills. Martina arrived precisely at 9 a.m., dressed in her usual black leggings and motivational tank top. "Ready to suffer?" she grinned. "Let's call it evolving," Eleanor replied. Their session was intense. Martina had Eleanor working on upper body strength and core stability, exercises designed to prepare her for more advanced mobility tools. "You're stronger than last week," Martina noted as Eleanor managed a full extension on the resistance bands. "Must be all the rage I'm suppressing." After the workout, as Martina packed up, Eleanor asked, "Do you think I could drive again?" Martina paused, then nodded slowly. "With the right car and modifications, absolutely. You'd need hand controls, of course. But I've seen clients drive across the country." Eleanor's mind whirred. "What kind of cars work for that?" "I can send you a few resources. But honestly, go test drive some. See what feels right." That afternoon, while Richard was at his meeting, Eleanor instructed Agnes to help her get ready. She put on a navy silk blouse and cream slacks, opting for simple pearl earrings. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and her makeup subtle but elegant. She had Agnes drive her to the Lexford Auto Gallery, a high-end dealership specializing in customized vehicles. As the car pulled up, Eleanor felt a flutter of nerves. She hadn't been to a dealership since before the accident. Inside, the space gleamed with polished chrome and minimalist decor. A young salesman approached with a practiced smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I help you?" "I'd like to look at modified vehicles," Eleanor said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm interested in test driving something with hand controls." The salesman blinked. "Oh, well, I'm not sure we have anything like that available today. These are performance models, usually not modified." "I'm aware," Eleanor said, wheeling closer to a sleek black coupe. "But I'd still like to look." He hesitated, then gestured toward a corner of the showroom. "We might have one in the back, but they're expensive, just so you know." Eleanor smiled. "So, am I?" As she examined the car, another employee, older, more polished, approached. "Ms. Carter. Miss Carter, I'm the manager here. I believe we may have something that fits your needs. Would you care to step into my office and discuss the options?" Within an hour, Eleanor had a list of available vehicles, customization options, and a tentative appointment for a private test drive. When Richard returned home that evening, Eleanor casually mentioned her outing. "You went to a dealership?" he said, surprised. "Without me? I wasn't aware I needed permission." Richard chuckled uneasily. "Of course not. It's just, that's a lot of effort for someone still doing therapy twice a week. I'm not planning a road trip. I just want my independence." "Well, we can talk about it. Maybe something safe and low to the ground, not one of those big SUVs." Eleanor didn't respond. She simply sipped her tea and looked out at the darkening sky. Later that night, as Richard slept beside her, Eleanor stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the past few months. The whispers at galas. The way Vanessa Lee had looked at Richard. The increasing number of work dinners and out-of-town conferences. Something was shifting. And it wasn't just her body. It was her marriage, her identity, her place in the world she had helped build. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something stir that had nothing to do with pain or grief. Determination. The next week, Eleanor returned to Lexford Auto Gallery for her private test drive. This time, she was greeted by the manager himself, who led her to a customized SUV parked outside. Midnight blue, with rose gold accents that shimmered in the sunlight. "The hand controls are intuitive," he explained. "Push forward to brake, pull down to accelerate. We've adjusted the seat height and added a pivot transfer base." Eleanor transferred herself into the driver's seat with practiced efficiency. Once settled, she took a deep breath and started the ignition. The engine purred to life, and something inside her did too. The drive was exhilarating. She took the vehicle around the test track, then ventured briefly onto a quiet suburban road. As she maneuvered the car through curves and traffic lights, she felt, for the first time in years, fully in control. When she returned, the manager smiled. "You handled that beautifully." "I'd like to buy it," she said. "We can finalize everything today if you're ready." Eleanor paused. "Actually, I'd like it delivered." He raised an eyebrow. "Certainly. To your home?" "No. To Riverstone Academy, Friday at 1 p.m. Please make sure it's spotless." "Of course. May I ask why?" Eleanor smiled. "It's my nephew's graduation, and I plan to make an entrance." Friday arrived with clear skies and a buzzing crowd. The private school's parking lot was packed with luxury vehicles, proud parents, and giddy students in blue and silver gowns. Eleanor arrived in a taxi, having arranged for her new SUV to arrive a few minutes later. She positioned herself strategically near the entrance to the auditorium, where Richard was already chatting with school board members. He saw her and waved, but his expression flickered with surprise. He hadn't expected her to show up. "Eleanor," he greeted, walking over. "You made it." As the night faded behind her, Eleanor sat in the back seat of her SUV, watching the city lights blur past the window. The gala had stirred memories, both bitter and beautiful, but she felt no anger anymore. Only clarity. Her phone vibrated. A message from her sister Melanie read, "You were the queen tonight. So proud of you." Eleanor smiled and replied, "Crown polished, throne reclaimed." The following morning, Eleanor returned to her downtown office, where her assistant Olivia greeted her with fresh coffee and a stack of papers. Media request from Channel 9, podcast interview with Women Who Build, and an invitation to speak at the Urban Design Symposium in Chicago. Eleanor took a sip. "Let's do the podcast and Chicago. Pass on Channel 9. "Understood," Olivia replied. "Also, a man named Daniel Wexler stopped by. Said he used to be your intern." Eleanor blinked. "Danny? With the glasses and the nervous laugh." "That's him. He's now director of sustainability at Greystone Developments." "Interesting," Eleanor murmured. "Let's set up a coffee meeting." That afternoon, Eleanor met Danny at a small, sunny cafe near the pier. He had grown into himself, confident, articulate, passionate. "You changed my life," he said earnestly, stirring his tea. "You taught me that buildings should serve people first. That accessibility isn't an afterthought." Eleanor listened quietly, heart full. "So what brings you to me now?" "We're launching a new eco-housing community in Oakland, but I don't want to do it without real accessibility. I want your eyes on it, your ideas." "I'd be honored," she said. "Let's collaborate." That collaboration bloomed into something bigger. Over the next few months, Eleanor worked with Greystone, consulted for city planning committees, and mentored young architects through her newly established program, Access //Impact. She was everywhere, on panels in magazines, on TEDx stages. Yet despite the growing acclaim, Eleanor never forgot the quiet moments that grounded her. Her morning tea, her calls with Liam, and her late-night walks along the water. One evening, she stood at the overlook where she and Richard had once celebrated their first big project. The view hadn't changed, but she had. She pulled out her journal and wrote, "Healing is not about erasing pain. It's about building over it, stronger, wiser, more beautiful." As fall settled in, Eleanor received an invitation that stopped her in her tracks. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter request the honor of your presence at the wedding of Samantha Lee and Richard Carter, December 3rd. She stared at it for a long time. There was no handwritten note, no apology, just a formal card. Wow, she whispered. She placed the invite on her desk and stared at it for several minutes before picking up her phone. Melanie, you're not going to believe this. Her sister gasped. You're joking. You have to go. Why? To show them. To remind them who the real queen is. Eleanor chuckled. I don't need to remind them, but maybe I'll remind myself. She didn't RSVP. She simply showed up. The grand ballroom of the Langford estate was glowing with golden lights, floral arrangements, and laughter. Guests mingled in tuxedos and designer gowns, sipping champagne beneath cascading chandeliers. At the entrance, a hush fell as Eleanor Carter glided in, emerald satin gown hugging her figure, diamond studs twinkling at her ears, and her custom carbon fiber wheelchair gleaming like a sports car. The whispering started immediately. Is that Eleanor? She looks incredible. Did she really come? Eleanor moved with grace, pausing only when a server offered her a flute of champagne. She took it with a nod, eyes scanning the room. Richard stood at the far end, arm in arm with Samantha, who wore an elaborate white lace gown. Their eyes locked for a moment. Eleanor's smile never wavered. She wheeled herself to an open spot along the wall, positioned perfectly to observe, not to hide. Eleanor, a familiar voice called. It was Vanessa Lee, now pregnant and glowing. I can't believe you came. I couldn't resist. Eleanor replied smoothly. After all, I helped build this guest list. They laughed. For the first time in a long while, it didn't sting. Samantha approached, her heels clicking softly on the marble. Eleanor, she said, offering a tight-lipped smile. You look good. You look bridal, Eleanor replied, with a tilt of her head. There was a pause, heavy but civil. I hope this isn't awkward, Samantha said. I mean, considering everything. Only if you make it so, Eleanor said evenly. Richard arrived seconds later, inserting himself into the circle. Ladies, he greeted. So glad you could join us. Eleanor turned to him, raising her glass. To reinvention. He hesitated, then clinked her glass. To reinvention. The ceremony was beautiful, staged like a magazine spread. A string quartet played softly as Samantha walked the aisle, and Richard stood with perfect posture and poise. Their vows were romantic, rehearsed, and polished for the audience. Eleanor watched without emotion, her face unreadable. At the reception, a microphone was passed around for speeches. Richard's best man told a long story about college. Samantha's sister cried, threw her toast. Then Liam, Eleanor's nephew, stood up. He was now 17, tall, confident, and wearing a fitted navy suit. I just want to say something quick, he began. A lot of people here know Richard and Samantha as this perfect couple, but I know someone else who deserves a toast. The crowd turned curiously. My Aunt Eleanor taught me that you don't need to stand tall to stand strong. That when people leave you behind, you build your own road. She's the strongest person I know. All eyes turned to Eleanor. Her throat tightened. Liam raised his glass. To Aunt Eleanor, the real architect of grace. The crowd applauded. A few even stood. Eleanor blinked back tears. She wasn't expecting a moment, but she accepted it fully. Later, as the music swelled and couples danced, Richard found her alone by the dessert table. That speech was powerful, he said. It wasn't for you, Eleanor replied softly. I know. He paused. I hope you find what you're looking for. I already have, she said, turning her chair toward the doors. The night air was crisp. Eleanor looked up at the stars as she waited for her car. Freedom didn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes It arrived in quiet moments, in toasts you didn't expect, and exits you made on your own terms. Her car pulled up. She got in. And just like that, she left her past behind and drove toward the life she'd chosen. It had been 6 months since the wedding. Eleanor's new firm, EC Collective, was thriving, a growing team of young designers, thinkers, and planners dedicated to inclusive and human-centered design. They had just landed a major contract for a community park renovation in downtown San Diego, and Eleanor insisted that every square foot would serve everyone, regardless of age, ability, or background. Design isn't just about form and beauty, she told her team during a Monday morning meeting. It's about dignity. The conference room was filled with nods and notes. Her leadership had become both respected and quietly legendary in the urban design space. Later that week, she visited the site for an early assessment. The city had scheduled a public feedback session in the park where residents could share their input. There, under the shade of an oak tree, Eleanor listened as parents, elderly couples, and disabled veterans voiced their frustrations and hopes. "I can't bring my grandson here anymore," said a woman. "The sidewalk cracks are a hazard. The swings are too low," added a man in a worn army jacket, adjusting the wheels on his chair. "And the ramps? They're cosmetic." Eleanor nodded, scribbling notes, asking questions, and promising no design would move forward without their lived experience informing it. That evening, she reflected on the meeting from her quiet apartment, a smaller, warmer place filled with art, books, and calm. No longer the sterile glass and marble mansion she once shared with Richard. Her phone buzzed. A text from Danny. "Client loved the mock-ups. They asked if you'd speak at the ribbon cutting in March." Eleanor replied, "Only if they let the community members speak too." Moments later, another message came in, this time from an unknown number. "Hi, Eleanor. It's Samantha." She paused. "And read it again. I don't expect to reply. I just wanted to say thank you for showing me what strength really looks like. I used to think it was about appearances. Now I know it's about knowing your worth, even when no one else sees it." Eleanor stared at the message, emotions shifting inside her. She didn't reply, but she didn't delete it either. Weeks passed. As winter faded and blossoms began to dot the streets, Eleanor stood at the edge of the newly renovated Hopeview Park, a community transformed by voices that had been ignored for too long. The ceremony was small but meaningful. Parents rolled strollers down smooth new walkways. Children played on adaptive swings. An elderly man used a wheelchair-accessible chess table under a tree. A reporter approached her. "Miss Carter, what inspired this project?" She smiled. Life inspired it. Pain inspired it. But most of all, people inspired it. And when the ribbon was cut, it wasn't Eleanor holding the scissors. It was a 5-year-old girl named Aria, who had been born with spina bifida, and whose laughter now filled the air as she zipped through the brand-new playground. Eleanor watched from the side, eyes glistening, heart full. That evening, Eleanor returned to her apartment, her soul still humming with the echoes of children's laughter and grateful parents. She placed her bag by the door, poured herself a cup of jasmine tea, and settled onto her balcony, watching the city soften under the setting sun. The sky was painted in streaks of lavender and gold, her favorite time of day. Her phone buzzed. This time it was a call. "Melanie," she answered. "I saw the news clip," her sister said, excitedly. "That little girl, Aria, she's gone viral. Everyone's sharing the ribbon-cutting video. You're trending on Twitter as the real architect." Eleanor laughed softly. "That's surreal. You deserve it. The work you're doing, it's bigger than any award or speech." Thanks, Mel. I needed that. After hanging up, Eleanor sat in silence for a while, sipping her tea. She thought about how far she'd come, from hospital beds and whispered condolences to blueprints and community impact. Suddenly, another call buzzed in. Unknown caller. She let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, a message popped up. Eleanor, it's Richard. I need 5 minutes. Please. She stared at the screen. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. But there was something in her chest, not pain, not anger, just curiosity. After a long pause, she called back. Hello. His voice came through, quieter than she remembered. It's me, she said. Thank you for picking up. What do you want, Richard? He sighed. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. And I know I've burned bridges that can't be rebuilt. You're right about that, she said calmly. I'm not calling to fix anything, he continued. I saw the story. The park. The girl in the wheelchair. And I realized something. Eleanor stayed silent. I thought power was in control. In money. In moving forward and never looking back. But watching what you've created, I realized power is in lifting others. And I never lifted you. Eleanor, I used you, and I'm sorry. There was silence on the line. Finally, Eleanor spoke. It's not forgiveness you need, Richard. It's change. Real change. I know, he whispered. She nodded to herself. Then show it. Not to me, to the world. Before he could respond, she ended the call. That night, she wrote in her journal again. Some endings aren't cruel. They're quiet, like a door gently closing behind you while a window opens somewhere ahead. The next morning, Olivia met her at the office with bright eyes. You've been invited to speak at the United Nations Women in Design Summit, she said, unable to hide her excitement. New York, next month. Eleanor smiled, setting down her coffee. Booked the flight. She spent the next few weeks refining her talk. It wasn't just about architecture. It was about the invisible spaces women carve out for themselves after being dismissed, underestimated, or broken. She titled it, Blueprints for Rebirth. And when she stood on the stage beneath the United Nations seal, a packed audience before her, she took a deep breath and said, I lost everything once. My body, my confidence, my identity, but what I gained was vision, not just for buildings, but for people. And from that vision, I built again. The standing ovation was deafening. Backstage, after the thunderous applause had quieted, Eleanor was approached by women from all over the world, architects, urban planners, students, mothers. A young woman in a hijab hugged her tightly. I'm studying design in Cairo. My professor made us watch your TED Talk. But seeing you live, it changed me. Another woman said through tears, I'm recovering from spinal surgery. Your story gave me hope I didn't think existed. Eleanor was overwhelmed. She hadn't come for validation. She came to speak truth. But here it was, living, breathing proof that truth, when shared, can heal more than just the speaker. She spent the night in a quiet suite overlooking Manhattan. As lights blinked below, she journaled. I was once the woman sitting alone in the crowd, silenced by pity and doubt. Tonight, I stood on the stage, not to prove I could, but to show that broken doesn't mean beaten. The following morning, while checking her emails, one subject line caught her eye. Nomination, Eleanor Carter, Global Human Design Prize. She opened the message. She had been selected as a finalist for one of the most prestigious awards in social design, given to leaders who reshaped the world through compassion and accessibility. Her eyes widened. She hadn't even applied. In the message footer was a single line. nominated by Daniel Wexler and the Greystone team. She smiled misty-eyed. Olivia walked in moments later, holding coffee and a newspaper. You're on the cover of the New York Ledger. Look. Eleanor glanced down. The headline read, Architect of Change, the woman who rebuilt her world and ours. Her photo was elegant and strong, wheelchair and all. The subheadline quoted her UN speech. I'm not here because I stood tall. I'm here because I didn't sit back. It was surreal. From that moment, offers flooded in documentaries, memoir deals, collaborations. But Eleanor remained grounded. I'll do one thing, she told Olivia, on my terms. No dramatized TV shows, no exploitation, just truth. 1 week later, she visited the original site of her accident, the Riverside development that changed everything. The new lead architect walked her through the building. I wish you had seen it before, he said nervously. We've made a lot of changes since your original plans. I'm not here to criticize, Eleanor said. I just wanted to see what was built on the pain. And as she walked with braces and a cane now, through the building, she noticed something incredible. Wide entryways, seamless transitions between levels, voice-controlled elevators, braille signage, a quiet room with soundproofing and dim lights for overstimulated guests. She turned to the architect, who approved these. He smiled sheepishly. Your original notes. We found them in the project files. After your accident, no one looked at them for a while. But I read through them, and it changed how I see everything. Eleanor stood silently, emotion rising in her throat. You've created something beautiful, she whispered. When she left the building, the sky was overcast, but the air felt warm, like the city was exhaling with her. Later that night, Liam called. Guess what? He beamed. I got into UCLA. Eleanor cheered. That's incredible. I want to study architecture, he added, and social design. Like you. She placed her hand over her heart. Then the world's in very good hands. Eleanor sat at her desk the next morning, rereading Liam's message about UCLA. She smiled, then looked around at the photos on her wall. Not of herself, but of the communities she had served. The park in Oakland, the housing complex in Detroit, the women's shelter in Portland. Each photo held faces, stories, and hope. She had once thought her legacy would be the buildings she designed. Now, she realized it was the people who thrived inside them. Her office door opened. Olivia stepped in holding a thin, white envelope. This just came. Hand-delivered. Eleanor took it. The envelope bore the golden seal of the Global Human Design Committee. She opened it slowly. Congratulations, Miss Carter. You are the 2025 recipient of the Global Human Design Prize. Her hands trembled slightly. She closed her eyes and exhaled. It wasn't validation she needed, but it felt healing. That weekend, Melanie visited with her twin daughters, now 8 and endlessly curious. The girls hugged Eleanor tightly as they entered her apartment. Anielle, are you really famous? One of them asked. Eleanor laughed. Only on Tuesdays. They played board games, baked cookies, and watched old architecture documentaries Eleanor had loved as a student. Later, after the girls had gone to bed, Melanie poured them both a glass of wine. You seem lighter, she said. I feel lighter. Melanie raised her glass. To strength, grace, and never sitting back. Eleanor clinked it. To sisters who never let you quit. The following week, preparations began for the awards ceremony in Geneva. Eleanor was scheduled to speak in front of world leaders, design pioneers, and thousands of live viewers. But before she left, she made one last stop. Back at Riverstone Academy, Liam's high school, she met with the board of directors. She had a proposal, a new scholarship program in her name. It's not just for architecture students, she said. It's for any student with a vision to improve the world, especially those overlooked because of disability, class, or trauma. The board approved it unanimously. She asked for one condition. Liam would be the first recipient, but he'd never know the scholarship was named after her until after graduation. That night, she packed for Switzerland, practical shoes, her signature emerald gown, her cane, and her mother's locket. She still wore it sometimes, especially when facing the world. Geneva was crisp and dignified, the auditorium grand and echoing. Eleanor waited backstage, calmly reviewing her speech. She didn't need notes. She never did, but holding them grounded her. As the announcer's voice rang out across the venue, her name was called. She wheeled out slowly onto the stage, cane resting beside her, the emerald gown catching every beam of spotlight. The crowd rose before she even spoke. Years ago, she began, I believed that success was measured in square footage, glass, and steel, that the more breathtaking the building, the more worthy the architect. But then life taught me something different. Her voice was steady, rich with truth, that the most beautiful structures we ever create aren't made of concrete. They're made of compassion, inclusion, and empathy. She looked out at the crowd. World leaders, architects, young students, women holding hands, men wiping their eyes. I didn't rebuild because I had no choice. I rebuilt because I refused to let one fall be my final story. When she ended, the applause didn't stop for nearly 3 minutes. And in the very front row, unexpectedly, she saw Richard. He stood, clapping with the others, his expression unreadable, but she didn't need to read it anymore. She wasn't here for him. She wasn't here for him. She was here for herself. And for every person who had ever been pushed to the edges and told they didn't belong in the center of the story. After the ceremony, Eleanor sat quietly backstage, the award cradled in her lap like something sacred. Not a trophy, but a symbol, a reminder that she hadn't just survived. She had risen. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Liam. I saw the live stream. You're a legend. I cried, not even embarrassed. She laughed, wiping a tear of her own. You made me believe I still had something to say, she replied. Another message followed. I want to be like you, build like you, but most of all, lead like you. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by the quiet legacy she had built, not of fame, but of influence. Not of control, but of connection. Later that night, she declined the official gala dinner and instead walked slowly with her cane through the old streets of Geneva. Cobblestones beneath her feet, stars above. She found a quiet cafe still open and ordered a pot of tea. As she sat alone by the window, she thought about the girl she used to be, rigid, high-achieving, afraid to rest. She thought about the woman who had fallen 14 floors, and the one who had risen from the rubble. Across the street, a little girl in a wheelchair pointed at her through the glass. Her father turned and smiled, then waved at Eleanor. Eleanor smiled back and raised her teacup in salute. She didn't need to speak a word. The message was clear. I see you. I am you, and we're both still rising. 2 days later, she returned home to a flood of letters, invitations, and flowers. But there was one envelope that stood out, simple white, no return address. Inside was a short note, written in familiar handwriting. You were never just the foundation, Eleanor. You were the whole structure. R. She folded the note slowly, placed it inside a drawer, and closed it gently. There were some chapters that no longer needed to be reopened. The weeks that followed were full of movement and peace. Her staff surprised her with a celebration at the office, cupcakes, confetti, and a printed banner that read, "Our Queen of Purpose." She laughed until she cried. She resumed consulting with Greystone, accepted the keynote at UCLA's Design Symposium, and began working with a new nonprofit in New Orleans focused on rebuilding after hurricanes with full accessibility. But one project lingered in her heart. The Riverside Tower, the site of her fall, was up for redevelopment again. The firm managing it had reached out, asking if she'd return as a lead advisor. "I know it may be triggering," the new director had said, "but we believe no one else could bring justice to this place the way you could." Eleanor visited the site alone. She stood in the same place where the platform had given way. Now, years later, there was nothing but open steel and raw space. Unfinished. Waiting. She closed her eyes and took a breath. This wasn't the scene of a tragedy anymore. It was a blank canvas. Later that night, she pulled out her old sketchbook, the one she hadn't touched in years, and opened it to a fresh page. She drew quietly for hours. Her hand moved like it remembered a song written in pain, but played in hope. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor worked on the Riverside redevelopment project with more clarity than she had expected. Each line she drew wasn't just about form or code. It was about redemption. Not for her, but for the space itself. She reimagined the building not as a monument to wealth or power, but as a community innovation hub, open to creative students and local startups. A place where voices like hers, once overlooked, could take center stage. Her concept included solar energy, green rooftops, gender-neutral restrooms, sensory-friendly zones, and universal access on every floor. When she presented her initial design, the board sat silent for a moment, stunned. "This is unlike anything we've seen before," the chair finally said. "It's not just a building. It's a movement." Eleanor smiled. "That's the idea." Back at home, Olivia updated her on more good news. "You've been nominated for the Presidential Medal of Design Innovation." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That's unexpected. You're the first nominee in a wheelchair in over 2 decades, Olivia added. Eleanor simply nodded. "Then I guess we're not doing this quietly anymore." A few nights later, Eleanor joined Melanie and the twins for dinner at a rooftop restaurant. Melanie raised a glass mid-meal. "To you, Elle, for showing us that sometimes falling is just the beginning of the real story." As they clinked glasses, one of the twins whispered, "Annie-Elle, are you going to be famous forever?" Eleanor chuckled. "Sweetheart, I'm not trying to be famous. I'm trying to be useful." The girl tilted her head. "But you're both." Eleanor smiled. That was enough for her. As autumn painted the city in gold and crimson, Eleanor received a request to do something she'd never done before. Write a book. A memoir. Her story in her words. She hesitated. She'd always believed her work should speak for itself. But then she thought of the women who'd reached out from Cairo, the girl in the cafe window in Geneva, Liam, her nieces, and the thousands who might never hear her voice unless she put it on paper. She said yes. The book was titled The Architect of Her Own Life. Each chapter chronicled not just her career, but the evolution of her spirit, from ambition to humility, from loss to legacy. She didn't hold back. She wrote about the fall, the betrayal, the fear, and the slow, aching climb back up. And most importantly, she wrote about joy, about laughter, about discovering strength she never knew she had. She ended the manuscript with one line: "I didn't rebuild to prove anything. I rebuilt because I was worthy of living in something beautiful." Months passed. The book was scheduled for release the following spring, timed with the grand opening of the Riverside Community Hub, a space that had once nearly broken her, now rebuilt by her own hands. On the morning of the final walkthrough, she stood at the rooftop garden of the nearly complete building. She placed her hand on the railing and looked out at the city that had once pitted her, now standing behind her because of her. Olivia joined her, handing her a steaming cup of tea. "You did it," she said quietly. Eleanor nodded. "We did." Below, workers were setting up banners. Florists arranged installations at the main entrance. A small orchestra rehearsed softly in the plaza. But Eleanor stayed on the rooftop, soaking it all in. She didn't need applause. She just needed the peace that came from knowing she had taken the broken pieces and made something breathtaking out of them. Of Eleanor's supporters, all gathered beneath a giant banner that read, "Built by everyone, for everyone." Eleanor arrived in her signature way, composed, elegant, and quietly radiant. She wore a soft ivory suit, her hair gently curled, and her cane by her side. Olivia wheeled out the podium for her as the orchestra finished their final warm-up. When Eleanor took the mic, the crowd fell into reverent silence. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice clear and calm. "Years ago, this place was a site of pain and broken promises. Today, it becomes a symbol of collaboration, healing, and unstoppable voices." She paused. "This building isn't mine. It belongs to the community that dreamed it, shaped it, and demanded better." Applause rang out, and "I hope," she added, her eyes shining, "that it stands as proof that even from our greatest falls, something stronger can rise." After the ribbon was cut, guests flooded the building, exploring every floor, admiring the artwork, the tech-integrated accessibility features, the open workspaces named after Eleanor's mentors and collaborators. One room in particular caught everyone's attention: the Eleanor Wong Carter Design Lab. Inside, walls were lined with touchscreen drafting tables. 3D printers hummed in the background. A quote above the entrance read, "Design is not what we build. It's who we build it for." Richard arrived late, standing quietly in the back, unnoticed by most. He didn't approach Eleanor at first. He just watched. She was laughing with a group of students, explaining how to adjust a wall's acoustics with simple modular panels. She was glowing, not from attention, but from purpose. Finally, he stepped forward. "You really did it," he said softly. Eleanor turned, surprised but unsurprised. "I did," she replied. Richard nodded. "I read the book." Eleanor gave him a gentle smile. "Did you find yourself in it?" "More than I expected," he admitted. "Less than I deserved." There was a pause. "I came to say thank you," he added, "not for forgiving me, but for teaching me." Eleanor studied his face. It had aged but softened too. She could see regret in his eyes. Not performative, not convenient. Real. "I hope you do something with what you've learned," she said kindly. "I already am," he replied. "Started a scholarship. Hired a new accessibility consultant for the firm. Her name's Jules, and she's brilliant." Eleanor's smile deepened. "Good. Keep listening to brilliant women. You'll go far." He chuckled. "Maybe not as far as you." With that, he extended a hand. "Peace." Eleanor shook it firmly. "Peace. No bitterness. No vengeance. Just closure." After he left, She stood on the balcony outside the lab and watched the community she helped build move freely through a space once frozen by fear. She whispered to herself, "This is what freedom looks like." Just then, Liam ran up breathless. "Auntie L, you won't believe it. UCLA asked me to join a panel with you this fall." She laughed. "We'll try not to embarrass each other." "I doubt I could top your story." He grinned. "You'll write your own," she said, brushing his cheek. "And I can't wait to read it." They stood side by side, looking out over the courtyard where kids played, elders chatted, and people moved through ramps and walkways like water. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. The noise faded. The wind blew gently against her skin, and everything she had ever lost felt like it had finally come home. Months passed. The Eleanor Wong Carter Design Lab became more than just a space. It became a sanctuary for creators, dreamers, survivors. Students from across the country applied for internships. News outlets ran stories titled, "The Woman Who Rebuilt Her Life Brick by Brick," and then opened the door for everyone else. Eleanor's book became a bestseller, not because of marketing, but because it spoke to something deep, the universal ache of starting over. She was invited to speak at Harvard, Stanford, and even back at Princeton, her alma mater. At Princeton, she stood on the same stage she'd once crossed nervously as a student, looking out at a sea of fresh faces. "When I first studied here," she said, "I believed buildings changed lives. Now I know stories do." She paused. "And sometimes the most powerful story you'll ever tell is the one you live." That night, as she walked through the empty campus, her cane tapping softly on the cobblestones, she passed by the old architecture studio, lights still on. A student hunched over their work. She smiled and kept walking. Back home, spring turned to summer. Olivia went on maternity leave, and Eleanor hired 2 new interns, both first-generation college students, both using wheelchairs. "I don't need your perfection," she told them on day 1. "I need your perspective." They beamed. One evening, after a long day of mentoring and reviewing blueprints, Eleanor sat on her balcony with a journal in her lap. She hadn't written in weeks, too busy living the life she once only dreamed about. She flipped to a blank page and began to write. "I was not built in one day. I was torn down, broken open, poured into forms I didn't choose. But still I rose. Not as I was, but as I was meant to be." She closed the journal, placed it on the table, and stood, not quickly, not effortlessly, but proudly. Below, city lights twinkled like stars. In the distance, the riverside hub glowed in soft gold, a living monument not to her pain, but to her purpose. She thought of her mother, her younger self, of Liam, of the strangers who had become friends, of every soul she'd unknowingly helped just by standing or sitting in her truth. Her phone buzzed. A notification. The architect of her own life has been translated into 17 languages. She smiled, not for the fame, but for the reach. Somewhere in the world, another woman sat alone in a hospital room, or in a boardroom where her voice wasn't heard, or in a wheelchair, wondering if she still had value. Maybe now she'd know the answer. Maybe now she'd see herself in Eleanor. As night blanketed the city, Eleanor whispered into the quiet, "Let them say I didn't give up. Let them say I gave it all away and still had more to give. Let them say I built something that lasted." And with that, she turned off the lights, left her balcony, and walked into the rest of her life, not as the woman she used to be, but as the architect of her own.